gonna be hell to pay. Clear Creek was a small community situated in Morgan County, Tennessee. Like many small Appalachian communities during the 1930s, the area was largely isolated, nestled in the rugged mountains, settled by several large family clans, led by hardened World War I veterans. They were the type of folks accustomed to the hard times brought on by the Great Depression. They never backed down from hard work, and they never backed down from a fight when it came to their family. That's right. And back in those days, any conflicts between families were usually settled the old-fashioned way, face to face with fists, knives, and guns. And any time the law got involved, it was usually a serious situation. As you might imagine, it took a special type of sheriff to keep law and order in these remote mountains. Moonshine steals were everywhere. Men would quickly resort to violence to protect them. And the same railroad that shipped coal and lumber out of these mountains brought in con men, outlaws, and criminals from all over America who would commit a crime and then quickly hitch a ride on a train, never to be seen again. The sheriff had to be the type of man who the community respected and feared at the same time, and that man's name was Pistol Pete Burge. Pistol Pete's real name was Harvey Burge, and he was an absolute legend as sheriff of Morgan County. You might conclude that his nickname Pistol Pete concerned his mastery of the pistol, but that assumption couldn't be further from the truth. You see, when he was just 14, a young Harvey Burge wanted to show off his dad's pistol to some of his friends. However, while he was carrying the gun, it accidentally discharged and set his trousers on fire. He knew his parents were sure to whip him good for sneaking his father's gun. Yet, instead of whipping him, his father gave him a good talking to about the dangers and the responsibilities of a firearm. When his dad was finished talking, his mama followed up the lecture by whipping him over and over for the next several days. Throughout his life, Harvey never forgot the words of his father or the whipping that his mama gave him, and the man who would become known as Pistol Pete rarely had to draw his firearm. But he was no stranger to a good fight. You see, he was a big man, 6'4" and full of muscle. On one occasion, Pistol Pete was returning home from a business trip in Cincinnati on a train. Also on the train was a heavyweight boxing prize fighter from Ohio who was traveling to Chattanooga. The boxer had had too much to drink and he began bullying several passengers. When the railroad staff tried to calm him down, the boxer began pushing him around. Now this boxer, he was a big man, over 6 feet tall. In his arms, they were large as most men's thighs. One of the passengers who recognized Pistol Pete looked at him, and he noticed the sheriff appeared to be struggling to maintain his composure, and he was literally biting his lip. The man asked the sheriff, "Pistol Pete, why haven't you done something? This man is going to hurt someone." Pistol Pete replied, "We're 6 miles from the Morgan County line. We'll see who's hurt when this train stops." Sure enough, as soon as the train crossed over the Morgan County line, the sheriff arose from his seat and he asked the prize fighter to stand up. The prize fighter quickly stood up, and before Pistol Pete could show him his badge, the heavyweight punched the sheriff in the gut with a massive blow. Pistol Pete staggered backwards in the center aisle, almost falling to the floor. Now, an angry Pistol Pete was furious, and he charged back towards the fighter, who dodged and danced while landing blow after blow on the sheriff. However, with the train still moving, the narrow center aisle tripped the boxer, and as he fell forward, his head met the fist of the sheriff, which landed him on the floor. Once on the floor, Pistol Pete kicked the boxer over and over. From the back of the train to the front. Finally, when reaching the front of the car, Pistol Pete pulled out his slapjack and knocked the boxer unconscious with one blow. As soon as the train stopped, Pistol Pete placed the boxer in the back of his car and politely took him to jail. Another famous move of Pistol Pete was the open hand slap. Many old-timers said that the sheriff could break your jaw with an open hand if the situation called for it. One poor soul learned this the hard way in Wartburg, Tennessee, late one afternoon. As the sheriff was talking to a lady from church, a Greyhound bus pulled up across the street, and a man stepped off the bus and began peeing right there in the street. Furious, Pistol Pete quickly walked across the street and began to lecture the man. When the sheriff finished speaking, the stranger replied, "Hillbilly, you need to find something else to worry about." And you see, that earned the stranger the Pistol Pete open hand slap. Onlookers who saw it happen claimed that the man traveled in the air almost half the length of the Greyhound bus before hitting the ground like a sack of potatoes. And just like that, the sheriff took him to jail. You see, Pistol Pete would just soon beat the hell out of a man with his own hands before ever reaching for his gun. And everyone in the county knew that Pistol Pete meant business. That's right, and you would have a worthy opponent if manufacturing illegal whiskey was your profession. Now, moonshine wasn't the only problem the sheriff had to deal with in Morgan County. In fact, one of his biggest concerns had to do with the family clans who were at odds with each other. Two of the biggest families in the Clear Creek community were the Davises and the Meltons. The Melton clan was led by Edison Melton, a tough, no-nonsense World War I veteran who had a reputation as a rough and rowdy fella with a quick temper. The Davis clan was led by a man named Jim Davis, who was also a hardened World War I veteran and a brawler. These two families had coexisted rather peacefully prior up to the Great Depression. However, a tragic accident between these two families would eventually result in an all-out war. It all started in 1934 when Luther Melton and Hubert Davis were sitting on the side of Clear Creek Church Road admiring a gun that Luther had recently purchased. Somehow, while passing the gun back and forth, the gun accidentally fired and killed Hubert Davis instantly. This sent shockwaves throughout the community, and Luther Melton was charged with manslaughter. During the trial, Luther claimed that it was an accident, and as you know, dead men tell no tales, so there wasn't any other witnesses to dispute his claims. So Luther was found not guilty and released from jail. Now this left a bad taste in the Davis family's mouths. Heck, losing someone you love by gunshot, and the man who shot him got off scot-free? No, they didn't like it one bit. And back in those days, this was a type of event a family would never forget. And one day, just like the Bible said, justice would be served. As they say, an eye for an eye. A few months later, on a Friday night, Luther Melton attended a barn dance at a neighbor's house. Pretty much everyone who lived in Clear Creek attended the gathering, since these events only happened a couple times a year. The women, they would spend all day preparing all sorts of food, while the children would spend the day cleaning and decorating the barn. There was usually someone who would play the fiddle, and maybe even a banjo or a guitar, with lots of singing. Now, anytime there was a good hoedown like this, you could be sure that there would also be plenty of moonshine on hand. Sure enough, as the night went on, many of the men were drunk. It's no secret that alcohol and a quick, loose tongue go hand in hand. Luther had more than his share of liquor that night, and before long, he got into an argument with another man named Earl Hickman. The men exchanged words back and forth when suddenly Luther stood up and called Earl a son of a bitch. In that moment, all the music and dancing was replaced with an awkward silence. Everybody there knew those were fighting words, and there was no way in hell Earl was about to let any man insult him in front of the entire community and get away with it. Earl jumped to his feet and he confronted Luther. As the two men shouted at one another, several of the other men stood between the two men and managed to separate them before the first punch could be thrown, although no violence happened. This event was far from over in both men's minds. Other than these occasional get-togethers, the only other place folks could visit with each other and catch up on the local gossip was Charlie Nelson's general store and the Clear Creek Church. The next day, after Luther Melton sobered up, he was still fuming about the events from the previous night. He wanted to get the word out to Earl that they had unfinished business, and he intended to settle it. Luther knew that the best way to send a message was to pay a visit to the general store. There was always a group of men hanging out on the porch or gathered around the potbelly stove inside. So it was. Luther went to the store and he put the word out. Any man that sees Earl Hickman, you tell him I got something for him after church tomorrow. Now wait a minute. Tomorrow was Easter Sunday. Everybody in Clear Creek was bound to be at church. Surely Luther wouldn't start a ruckus on this holy day. Or would he? Sunday morning, the entire community started out for the sunrise church service. The church was centrally located, and most people walked to the church. Folks by the dozens could be seen coming from all directions, dressed in their Sunday best, before finally the church was packed. Before long, songs of praise and sermons of resurrection and everlasting life echoed throughout the congregation. Luther was seated in the back of the church, flipping randomly through his Bible as the service went on. But the whole time, he had his eye on Earl, who was seated in the front row. Luther wanted to make sure that he was the first one out of the church, to make sure Earl couldn't slip out without him noticing. As soon as the service was over, Luther exited the church and stood on the steps just outside of the front door. Slowly, the crowd began pouring out, and before long, there he was. Earl's eyes met Luther's, and both men instantly had rage in their eyes. Earl wasn't about to back down from Luther's challenge, and he began walking straight towards him, weaving his way through all the people lined up to shake the preacher's hand. As soon as Earl approached, Luther opened up his Bible and he pulled out a small knife known as a pig sticker. Yet, before Luther could thrust the knife, Earl pulled out a pistol from his church jacket and fired. Chaos broke out. Children began screaming, and some folks ran for the woods. Others ran over the preacher, back into the church, and hid behind the pews. The bullet ripped through Luther's stomach. But he managed to stay upright, and he thrust forward with the blade before Earl fired again, shooting him right through the chest. Luther was dead. By the time Pistol Pete arrived, Luther's body had been placed on a church pew, and men were carrying his body away from the church to the undertaker. Pistol Pete promptly arrested Earl on a murder charge and placed him in jail with a $2,000 bond. By now, the entire community of Clear Creek was being torn apart. Some saw Luther's death as being payback for when Luther shot and killed Hubert Davis. Others were outraged at the violence that was sweeping through the area. Eventually, when Earl went to trial for the murder charge, he claimed self-defense, and he was acquitted. This added more fuel to the simmering feud between the Davis and the Melton clans. Pistol Pete spent the next several weeks meeting with all the families and making it clear to everyone that he wouldn't tolerate any more violence in his county. Yet, despite the feud, there was one thing that secretly brought both the Davis and the Melton families together: moonshine. That's right. Behind the scenes, several members of each family were working together and running a large operation where they would produce hundreds of gallons of moonshine at a time. They would sell the liquor to the lumber mill in Lansing, who would load it up on a large truck and then cover it with a full load of lumber and deliver it to Cincinnati to a large crime ring. No one ever suspected that the lumber mill was a cover for one of the largest moonshine operations in Morgan County. The preferred method for making the moonshine was to wait and run it off on Sundays. Now there was a reason for that. Everybody in the community would be at church, including Pistol Pete, and that left the Davis and the Melton families free to run off all their liquor, get it bottled up, and delivered to the lumber mill for transport long before the preacher ever said his closing prayer. It was a genius plan that had worked perfectly. When the next Sunday rolled around, there was a plan to run off 100 gallons, and that was a lot of moonshine with a big payday attached to it. However, it seems that the Davis family had secretly decided it was time to cut the Melton family out of the scheme. That's right. When Edison Melton arrived at the still early Sunday morning, all of the liquor was gone. Damn it! Those Davis boys stole it. I know damn well they did this. Oh, he was furious, and he headed straight for Jim Davis' house. When Edison arrived, the house was quiet, and there was no one to be seen. "Jim Davis, you come out here right now. I know you're in there, and I know what you done." Jim opened the door, and he walked out on the porch with a double-barrel shotgun over his shoulder. Edison yelled, "You think you're the only man with a gun? You're a fool. I want my money. I know you stole the 100 gallons. Jim denied knowing anything about it, and that only angered Edison further, when suddenly Edison pulled his pistol and he shot Jim in the chest before he had a chance to fire his shotgun. In that moment, a hailstorm of bullets directed at Edison rained down from the second-story window of Jim's home. Edison wasn't the type of man to retreat, but for the moment, he was badly outnumbered, as all of Jim's sons were returning fire. Edison made it to the woods and he headed for his house to load up on more guns and ammo. He knew that if the Davis clan was going to take Jim to the hospital to treat that wound, they were going to have to take the only road out of Clear Creek, and that road passed right in front of Edison's house. He intended to make sure they never made it out. One of Jim's sons, Emmett Davis, was at work at the time of the shooting, and on his way home he stopped at the general store. When the owner told him that his dad had been shot by Edison Melton, he was instantly filled with rage. He grabbed the store owner's .22 rifle and he hopped into his 1940 1.5-ton truck and headed straight for Edison's house. By now, Edison was lying in wait, ready for the ambush. Sure enough, he heard the sound of Emmett's truck coming up the road. Once it was in sight, Edison unloaded a hailstorm of bullets, busting out every window of the truck and riddling it with bullets before Emmett jumped out and ran for his life. Soon, a group of men notified Sheriff Pistol Pete of the gun battles that were breaking out, and Pistol Pete grabbed his hat, and he asked who was responsible. One man spoke up. "Edison Melton is." Pistol Pete stopped dead in his tracks. Even he knew that Edison was not a man to be messed with. Pete only had one cop car in the entire county with a blue light, and it was nearly an hour away on the other side of the county. However, he insisted that he wouldn't confront Edison without being in an official cop car. A couple hours later, Pistol Pete made his way to Edison Melton's house, where he passed a couple Davis boys walking down the road with a gas can, intending to burn down Edison's home. The sheriff assured the boys that he would arrest Edison and make sure their father got to the hospital. So the boys agreed to let him arrest Edison, which he did without incident.
Hey guys, this is JD Phillips from the Appalachian Storyteller, and I hope you're enjoying Blood on the Water. I'm going to be giving away a free copy of this true story. All you got to do is share this video to your social media and then comment below where you're watching this video from. I'll pick a winner and I'll send this out to you for free. If you'd like to get a copy of this book, there's a purchase link in the description of this video. Take you to Amazon, you can get your own copy. It's a killer story, and the story you're watching now is only part of it. Now, back to Blood on the Water.
Everyone feared that the worst was yet to come. After all, Edison posted bail within a couple hours of being arrested and was back out. The Davis family wasn't about to let all this play out in court again. No, sir. In their minds, it was time to end this once and for all. They would wait until they caught Edison alone and kill him. A few days later, Edison and his wife were walking down a trail near Clear Creek Church, returning home from the general store, when they were confronted by the entire Davis clan. This time, they had him outnumbered and surrounded. He wasn't about to escape. Edison's wife spoke up. "It's all in the hands of the law now. Y'all go on home and let this play out in court." One of the Davis boys spoke up. "We are the law in Clear Creek, and we're going to settle this right now." And with that, he leveled his double-barrel shotgun at Edison's wife, and in an instant, unloaded the left barrel and shot her dead right where she stood. Before she hit the ground, the Davis boy unloaded the right barrel on Edison, purposely shooting him in the groin. Edison staggered backwards and doubled over when the Davis boy took the shotgun and slammed Edison across the skull so hard that it bent both barrels of the shotgun. The entire Davis clan took turns beating Edison to a bloody pulp with the stock of the gun until he stopped moving and appeared lifeless. A few hours after they left, Edison Melton regained consciousness, but he was beat nearly to death. His face was completely unrecognizable, and the shot to the groin had rendered his legs useless. He knew he had to get help, and he began crawling towards his elderly aunt's house. He had to crawl across Little Clear Creek, where he left a trail of blood across the rocks on each side of the creek. An hour later, he crawled up the steps of his aunt's home, and he knocked on the door with all the strength he had left. He was unable to speak because of the beating he had taken. All of his teeth had been knocked out, and his eyes were both swollen shut. His aunt opened the door. She couldn't even recognize her own nephew. Fearing that the men responsible for this would soon be looking for this stranger, she shut the door in his face, double locking the other side, completely unaware that it was her own nephew. For the next several hours, Edison slipped in and out of consciousness as he continued to crawl over a mile to the general store. When he finally arrived to the store, the owner used the only phone that was available in Clear Creek to call Schubert's in Wartburg to send the ambulance. The Davises had won the battle, but the war was far from over.